What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. Okay, let's do a little Middlekauff mailbag. At John Middlekauff, Instagram, fire in those DMs. Get your question answered here on a little thing called the podcast mailbag. Aaron, love the pod. Question around the Chiefs. Looking forward to upcoming seasons. What do you think the strategy is around some key players that come at a price? We look at some of these guys coming up on their final years of their first contracts. Who do you retain versus who do you draft? Players like Bolton, Karlaftis, McDuffie, Trey Smith, Pacheco. Not all these guys are going to be top of the market. Some probably are. But they aren't going to be cheap. Curious your thoughts on those discussions with Veach and the team having around this topic. Well, I would say McDuffie is a lock keeper. I would say Karlaftis is going to be kept as well. Nick Bolton's obviously a really good player. It just becomes a little complicated with linebackers and prices, how much you're willing to pay him, how much you're going to allocate. Like, McDuffie's not going to be cheap. Like, that's a really, really expensive player. You know, George is not Bosa, like the high-end pass rushers. But even if you get those guys at a discount, it's still, what is it, $18, $19 million a year? I would say Isaiah Pacheco, he is not a second contract guy, despite him being a really good player. My guess is that they will just play out his rookie contract. When it comes to Trey Smith, I thought they extended Trey Smith. Maybe they didn't. So Trey Smith's contract, I mean, he's a really good player. God, he's a great deal right now. How much does it cost him? Trey Smith currently costs them 940 grand. So yeah, I don't know. You're gonna have to pay some of these guys. Now, Karlaftis, McDuffie are both going into their second. This is their third year. So I think they would play it out again with both those guys. Usually, ideally, with guys you sign after 4 years, so you could keep them under contract for another year. Am I nuts, or is the Darnold versus McCarthy talk complete nonsense? How in God's name are the Vikings going to even consider letting Darnold walk? Because they love JJ? Based off of what? On what planet does an unproven, injury-prone J.J. McCarthy put you in a better position to win than Sam Darnold? I totally agree. But I think that there's a money ball element to them. They just did it with Cousins. I think they believe they can do it again with Darnold to J.J. McCarthy. I think one thing when you watch Darnold compared to Cousins, that element of movement is something that Cousins did not have. And he has a much bigger arm. And being 27 years old, when you just build around him and keep JJ, let him prove that he's healthy as like a contingency plan, right? Like if Cousins was a Pro Bowler this year, no one would have any issue and they'd be in first place. But he's a disaster, right? So like once you sign the bridge quarterback and then he's incredible and he's also 27, 28 years old with a pedigree, being a high pick, you go, are we sure we didn't just strike oil here? I would I would offer him the Baker Mayfield deal yesterday. The Packers have a ton of offensive talent. Watson, Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, and Tucker Kraft. Who are they going to pay? The Packers make quick, smart decisions, so I assume they already made up their mind. What do you think? The Packers paid Love a ton of money, so that is going to hurt them moving forward. They cannot afford to pay everybody, especially with young, emerging talent. Well, a tight end is one of the best deals in the league because the highest paid tight end makes less than half of what the top wide receiver makes. So you can get that guy at a very, very cheap number. To me, they are a great, great deal. So I would say that Tucker Kraft is a lock. And listen, how much is he actually going to cost? He's having a breakout year this year. He has 41 catches and 7 touchdowns, and he's only in his second year. So, like, you still got another year under him on a very cheap deal. Christian Watson is what year is this for him? Four? Or is this year three? Some of these guys aren't. I think you got some time with some of these guys. Christian Watson was 22. So 22, 23, 24. He's a second round pick. So he would be going into his contract year next year. He's kind of polarizing because he's been injured. Honestly, he hasn't really been that productive. God, he's been way less productive than I realized. I guess last year he was injured. This year he's got 29 catches, only two touchdowns. I mean, what the fuck's that going to cost you? I think Jaden Reed's a stud, but how many? You got time on these guys. And when I say time, like, plus they all kind of take away from each other. None of them, like, Jaden Reed is a second year player and he's got 44 catches. Last year he had 64. So he'll be back to back 64, 60 catches, seven, eight, nine touchdowns. I think you're in a good position. None of these guys have to be paid. What the fuck is this for the mailbag? This is crazy. You can talk to your players as the head coach. Are you the boss of all bosses? Like, what is this guy thinking? It was the video of the Eagles defensive line coach screaming at Sirianni to get away from Jalen Carter. I think Jalen Carter is a pretty big wild card. And the way I heard it described when he was coming out of college, like he's a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. So you got to be careful with him. And after he hit the dude on the Steelers and took the 15-yard penalty, any coach worth their salt would go over and talk to the guy. Every single one. But I wonder if the D line coach knows that like this could unravel fast. And Jalen has been playing at like a Pro Bowl level. So it's like we got Sirianni who can be a hothead. We're just trying to simmer everything down. But can you imagine an assistant coach telling Mike Tomlin, telling Jim or John Harbaugh, telling Andy Reid, telling Kyle Shanahan or McVay or LaFleur to back the fuck up? I don't, that's not exactly what he told him, but like, you're not talking to this guy right now. Think about that. That was pretty nuts. Like, hey, bro, you work for me and I want to talk to my guy. Even if it's not a great idea. Now, that position coach might have been doing Sirianni a favor because there might have been nothing productive that would have been a result of their conversation because everyone's emotions were high. You're winning the game. But that seems crazy to me. Like, I'm the boss. And it's like, well, are you? I don't know. Eagles are a weird thing. It's like they're a dysfunctional high end operation. It feels like they're a little like they got a lot going on, but they got so much talent, it works. It's like sometimes you hear about a buddy who like works for a guy. Sometimes you'll just meet someone and you'll be like, this guy's nuts. It happens a lot when I'm playing golf that, you play with other friends and they bring people. And then all of a sudden you'll realize like on the seventh hole, you'll be like, yeah, that company he's talking about, he owns it and it's worth like $300 million. I'm like, that guy? It's like, yeah, he's just a dysfunctional, functional individual. and it works. And that's kind of feels like what the Eagles are. They got a lot of shit going on at all times, but they got so much talent and it all comes together and it just works. Question for the bag. We know that the quarterback is the most important position in sports, but I can't help but think that having an elite coach and a good quarterback is better than an elite quarterback and a good mediocre coach. Look at Burrow versus the Broncos and Bo Nix. For example, I genuinely think that I would much rather have Andy Reid and a quarterback like Dak than Josh Allen and Zach Taylor. Curious your thoughts. I would agree. Like I would rather have my if I was a fan, my team would make the playoffs more often and more consistently with Andy Reid and Dak Prescott than Josh Allen and just pick some terrible coach. The problem is we've seen like Andy with Josh Allen. Hell, we saw Bill the one good year he has with Mac Jones. Your ceiling in the playoffs is pretty limited. So it's like, yeah, your team can win 9 to 12 games. We saw it with Andy for a long time with Alex Smith. Same thing with Jim Harbaugh with Alex Smith. But if you get the real coach, like Andy Reid and Alex Smith are making the playoffs every year. They just weren't going far. But if I gave Josh Allen's in a pretty good organization. Like Sean McDermott's a good coach. The Bills are just a well-run organization. If you put them on like the Jags, it might not look the same, even if he was a great player. I agree with you. Football more than these other sports, like baseball, my manager, how much does it really matter if my team's stacked? Right? A little bit in the playoffs, but during the regular season, if my team is loaded, I can win 100 games. In basketball, you would 100% pick one of the top players over a top coach without hesitating. Football, like, what's the number one overall draft pick if you were a team? Could you argue that you would pick Andy Reid before you picked Mahomes? Because if you had pick number 33, think of all the coaches and quarterbacks that would be off the board. Couldn't you just draft like Dak Prescott, right? Or just some solid quarterback? So would you rather have Josh Allen or Mahomes or Lamar one? And if I got to pick a below average coach, that'd be pretty risky. Football's the one sport where you could justify taking it. If everyone was available, taking the coach first. I'm not saying that's the right move. Like, I probably would just take Josh Allen. But if you took Andy Reid, I couldn't argue with you. Question for the bag. Longtime Niner fan. With Lynch willing to take swings, would it be a fantasy world if him and Kyle would be willing to trade Joe Burrow? With reports coming out between the disconnect and the Bengals and their history of frugality, it would be a long shot, but the combo of Burrow and Shanahan is a mouth-watering prospect. I think about this sometimes. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I think if you'd even entertain the call, even if they said, "Hey, we'll offer you whatever you want. You tell us what you want and we will accommodate your wishes." Just fold the franchise. If the Bengals right now would entertain trading Joe Burrow, they should fold the franchise or sell the franchise immediately. So I tried to put myself in their shoes, and I think because the NFL, if this was baseball, you'd be like, yeah, Joe Burrow's on the market. You could go get him. But I think because it's football, they have the money. I just don't think he'd be available uh, in 2025. Now, maybe in a couple more years, if they keep losing, maybe they try to pivot, but I see under zero circumstances. Now, would the 49ers do it in a New York second? I'm with you. I mean, Joe Burrow. I mean, we've seen Joe Burrow and Brock Purdy on the same field at the same time last year. One guy looked like Joe Montana. And listen, it feels like I'm shitting on Brock Purdy. I'm really not. I like him a lot as a player. But like Joe Burrow's what an elite, blue chip, championship level player looks like. Purdy is like, I don't know. I mean, we're still kind of figuring that out. I mean, hell, he makes $1 million. What happens when he makes 50? But obviously, you would rather have Joe Burrow than Brock Purdy. I just think it's very rare in the NFL. It takes a lot. Carson Palmer basically quit, had to retire for them to get rid of him. Bay Area native, living near your hometown, living in Vacaville. Now, I know Vacaville well. They used to have a mall back when malls mattered. I guess you guys still have outlets. When I lived in Walnut Creek, I used to stop at, they had a Nike outlet there. They had a Chipotle there. Every once in a while, when I was feeling like a fat ass, they had a Krispy Kreme there that I'd hit up. They had an In-N-Out. So I was a frequent Vacaville stopper, really my adult life. And when I was a kid, my mom, we used to go there all the time. I am a diehard Niner fan and a Purdy believer, but I do think he's anywhere. I don't think he's anywhere near the elite quarterbacks and certainly doesn't deserve to be paid like a top guy. If you were the Niner GM, what would you do with Brock and what would his contract look like? Second, looking down the road, after I retire from my current career, I would like to get a job in football, assistant strength coach, or even a scout. I've been an assistant football coach at my old high school for 20 years and plan on continuing. I'll be 50 in 12 years when I retire. God, you're retiring young. Life is good. Um, so would I be too old to get a job like a scout or an assistant coach at like a Sac State? I don't think you'd be too old to get a job at like a Sac State or UC Davis. I think it would be very difficult for you to get a scouting job uh, at that point in time in your life with no history of. It's not like you could just, even if you know football well, uh, it would be difficult. Obviously, too, I don't know. If you don't know anyone, it'd be near impossible. Sac State or UC Davis is much more, I would say, of a attainable goal. Uh, I was trying to. My fiance Maria is a huge 49er fan. So we were talking last night because she sees all these memes and things, and she's trying to figure out, like, what's everyone talking about Purdy and his contract? And she saw Richard Sherman go on this rant, like, the price is the price. And it's like, yeah, the price is the price if you're bad at business. It's like, yeah, this house, because of the market, is worth $5 million. But I also think if you're willing to pay $5 million for this house, I think you're an idiot. Like, two things can be true. Like, that's kind of the going rate because of the market conditions. And it's like, this house is in terrible shape and you'd have to put in another $3 or $4 million just to make it livable. Right. But because of the location, where it is, I mean, we could argue market conditions till we're blue in the face. And she's in real estate, so I use the example of, like, well, he's technically going to make more than Patrick Mahomes because Patrick Mahomes had his contract years ago, and a lot like real estate. Well, if you bought the house in 2021, now the next door neighbor's house, even if it's not nearly as nice, is worth more than that 4 years later. And it's kind of this scenario. But again, like, if you want to pay him that, I don't know what to. I think it's bad business. Like, well, the market's the market. Yeah, the market's the market. Trevor Lawrence, that's fucking terrible business. Tua is those type contracts derailed their franchise, derailed the franchise. If you would look at the Jags and go, they still owe him. His contract hasn't even started. It's like, I'm shorting your franchise. Tua, his contract hasn't even started. I'm out. Like, I'm gone. So it's like, well, the market was the market. Well, yeah, some things you pay market prices for. Other things you go, I'll pass. That's not a good idea. And I saw one thing Richard said is like, well, do you have a replacement? It's like, do you need a replacement right now? He's still under contract for a year. Why can't we play? What's he going to do? Hold out? Okay, good luck. I don't think you will. Whatever happened to playing hardball? What happened to that? I think we need a little more hardball, right? The NBA stopped playing hardball. We see how that's going. Not well, because they just acquiesce to every demand. And now they're starting to not, but it's almost too late. Everyone checked out. The NFL just kind of gave in to a lot of this stuff. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna let it ride. It's one thing. It's like Joe Burrow, okay, generational player. We get it. Like, we know what it looks like, and this is fucking good. We've had solid average in Andy Dalton. Before that, we had high-end Carson Palmer. Like, okay, we have a pretty good idea. This is pretty special. This is what it costs. I'm sorry. It's just because other people got paid something doesn't mean it's a good idea. It honestly makes no sense to me. And I get the caps going up, and I'm not saying you pay him nothing, but, like, if you use the Trevor Lawrence deal as a comp, I go, yeah, we're not the Jaguars. We don't ever plan on running a business like the Jaguars, and we think signing a contract like that is the immediate death of everything we got going on here. So again, we pass. It's like, well, who's your replacement? Well, we don't have one. You're still the quarterback. This is the National Football League. You're under contract. And all that money you're making off the field is because you're the starting quarterback for our franchise. And I'm not trying to be a tough guy or whatever. Like, he's a very respectable, good guy, and it's not like he's even said any of this. But this conversation, I feel like, has jumped the shark. And maybe it's some of the reporting. Pelissaro said I'm not going to take a hometown discount. Well, who are you going to play for then? Like, what's your market? That's where I still don't understand. Like, what's the market? Part of, like, when a guy's holding out, like TJ Watt, it's like, well, he'd have a massive market. Even Ayuk last year, the hold in, like, other teams wanted him. The Patriots were willing to give him $32 million a year. The Browns were willing to give him $30 million a year. The Steelers were willing to give him $28 million a year. Like, that was factual. Is that the case with Purdy? Like, hey, we're offering you $110 million guaranteed. Do you have other offers out there? We'll let you sniff around. We need your replacement, and we obviously let us know what the contract is. And we'll see if we'll match or whatever. Like, you got $150 million on the open market? Just because previous deals are bad, like the Deshaun Watson deal is an embarrassment for the NFL. No one else is getting fully guaranteed contracts. It's the most wonderful time of year for getting in on all the hoops, football, and hockey action at the DraftKings Sportsbook. It's the season of giving, and we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too, almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get 150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get 150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. When you bet, just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Is the mainstream sports media propaganding us to believe Josh Allen is the MVP? Lamar Jackson is leading him in every statistical category outside of rushing TDs. Is this sort of like LeBron fatigue? Why do you think Lamar isn't getting any more love this year? Well, he's the defending champion, with the award, defending award winner. He's he's actually having a way better statistical season than he did last year. Remember last year he threw 25 touchdowns. This year he's got 34. He's got multiple like 4 or 5 touchdown games. Uh, Part of it too is Josh's team has a better record, and his team cut all these people in the offseason, right? Most of Lamar's teammates came back and they added very similar roster to last season for Lamar Jackson. Defense has fallen off a cliff, but it's the same players. So I think there's some fatigue. I think if Lamar hadn't won it last year, I think there would be more of momentum for him in the mix. I think fatigue is fair. Like, is Lamar Jackson a 3-time MVP at 28 years old or whatever he is? Like, that seems 27 years old. Like, I got no problem with people not giving him the award this year. It's like, well, okay, he's had a better season this year than last year, but he still got the award one of the 2 years. That's fine with me. I love the content. I'm a diehard Chiefs fan, and I've been one since I was little. We constantly get a lot of hate from the rest of the league and fans around the refs and dark magic. I personally feel it's unjustified. I was wondering your take on this and possibly what you think about them completing the three-peat and what it would mean for them in the league. Well, what's funny is historically the big brands used to get this. The Lakers, when I was a kid, I hated the Lakers, right? I was a big Kings fan as a kid, and the Lakers lost that series when Vlade tipped it out to Robert Ory. And then it turns out Tim Donaghy was throwing the game. Like, I mean, he admitted to cooking the books. And obviously David Stern, which I don't blame him if I was in his shoes, wanted the bigger brands for television ratings. But in the NFL, it doesn't matter. Whether the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, whether the Bills are in the Super Bowl, whether it's the Lions, whether it's the Eagles, whether it's the Packers, it's been proven now these last 4 or 5 years. These playoff games, I just saw the Bills and the Lions outdrew the Steelers and the Eagles. 23 million people watched the Bills and the Lions. Buffalo and Detroit over the Steelers are a top 5 brand in the NFL, and the Eagles are clearly one of the biggest markets in the league. And they outdrew them by a lot. Honestly, I had both games on. I obviously so did most people, but I had the Eagles audio on up until the second half when the game kind of got out of control. Then I flipped. I felt like it, and maybe it's I don't know. I don't know why I was inclined to be drawn to the Eagles Steelers over Bills Lions, but as a consumer, that's what I lean toward. Like if you told me I could only watch one game at the beginning of the day, I would have chose that game. But so maybe I'm out of touch with like what the consumer is. The Lions are an incredible story. Great part about technology. You can watch them both. Dark Magic, like no one gives a fuck. Like, the Raider fans have been saying it for years. Like they still got it out for us. Guys, Al Davis has been dead for 15 years. Your franchise hasn't been good in 20. It doesn't matter. You're not getting called for a lot of penalties because you're the Raiders. Maybe that was true in the 70s and 80s, and I'm sure there was some validity behind it. That's not true anymore. Just like the Chiefs are not getting bailed out. Referees are a lot like government officials. They're incompetent. Honestly, nobody roots for referees. If it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have realized obviously the political media and the sports media root for these politicians. It's really weird. Like these people are lifetime politicians, guys. They wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire in their front yard. And it's like you guys are their biggest cheerleaders. Like it's kind of weird. They're both incompetent. Like these guys couldn't fucking operate in the private sector. Like this is their only job. Politician. Like referees. Like what are we doing here? Now, being a referee is difficult. Like you're talking real time, human beings, basketball, baseball, football for sure. But in football, if you play bad, you get cut or fired. You know, if you coach bad, you get fired. GM, if you pick the wrong player, you get fired. These referees make bad calls and they're on the game the next week. I just don't get it, but it's the way it is. So I don't get caught up in it anymore. But I don't. Some stories I just don't pay that much attention to. Like it's like I don't care. It's like Travis Hunter and his girlfriend. Like I do not give a shit. Like you'd have to pay me to care to like have an opinion. It's like guys, he's 21 years old. How are people so invested in this? Maybe there are certain parts of sports that like I'm detached from, but that's one area. And maybe there's a personal thing with me. Like I'm a big believer in I don't really have opinions on my friends or my family, like who they're sleeping with, whether it's girlfriends, wives, like you choose to do that. You can do whatever you want to do. I don't care. Like we're all adults, that's on you. You know, do whatever you want to do. I'm not going to get caught up in it. The Travis Hunter thing is like, guys, what are we even talking about? I think the same thing about refereeing. It's like, are we serious? I also think that's such an online thing. Question for the bag. I like when you shout out other bald men. I'm not bald myself, but I support the bald community. Give me your Mount Rushmore of bald guys. One for sports and one for general population culture. Also, how do you feel about bald men like Larry David who don't shave their heads? Instead maintain the cul-de-sac. Well, I think the older generation, the cul-de-sac being cleanly shaven, like with a Bic razor back in the day, and now the four, three heads, five heads, the Mach threes, Mach fives, is much more in vogue. I would say I got no issue with Larry and kind of that generation rocking that. My father, who was bald, rocked a cul-de-sac when he was my age. If I rocked a cul-de-sac, I I just I think people would think I was the ugliest human alive. So it's things have changed. I would say Mount Rushmore for the culture or pop mainstream non-athlete. You would go when I was a kid, Bruce Willis, who's battling, I think, dementia right now. It's not going good, but Bruce has got to be near the top. Um, this guy's technically an athlete, but the last 20 years, he played college football. The Rock would have to be extremely high. Um, I would go Bruce Willis, The Rock. This is tough. Sports are easy, right? Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Tiger Woods. Uh, we got any bald baseball? Jay Buhner, love Jay Buhner, and he rocked the cleanly shaven head in the '90s before it was cool. I'm trying to think of other really famous actors or people in pop culture. Um, it's a good question. The actors, it's hard for them to get jobs. So many people do fake hair. So many people would be bald, but bald culture actors. Like I wouldn't yeah. See. Honestly, I did most famous bald actors, and my two were near the top: Dwayne Johnson and Bruce Willis. I guess you could go Jason Statham. I don't know, Ed Harris, Samuel L. Jackson. I think Samuel L. would be up there. Um, Vin Diesel. I don't know, Terry Crews, J.K. Simmons. Big fan of J.K. Simmons. Travolta's one guy that clearly fought it for a long time and has now just completely embraced it. When you see Travolta now, he used to he clearly had a wig for a long time. Bald singers. Kenny Chesney, it's a pretty good one. Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins, not bad. I To me, it's hard to get stronger than Willis and The Rock. Everyone else is fighting. And in sports, I mean, I would say the most iconic one by a mile is Michael Jordan. I consider Tiger Woods bald as well. Eagles fan here. I know you have mentioned on several occasions that Big Dom is an important asset to the Eagles. I think it was you that referred to him as the guy who knows where the bodies are buried. My friends and I in our group chat have been discussing that he's become famous. It almost comes across as a joke every time his name is mentioned in a story about the team. I tend to agree that he is important to the team and their culture, but always get pushback. My question is this: can you put into words what exactly Big Dom does and why he's so important to the team? No, I can't. I think he does a little bit of everything. It's like there are humans in companies that work for the bosses that it's hard to describe their roles. But that boss and that human knows what they bring to the table that no one else can quite figure out, right? In a lot of non like Fortune 500 companies and like a smaller business, that guy exists sometimes. And ultimately, while a football team is worth billions of dollars, they're not a huge operation in terms of employees. And obviously, the most important employees are your players and your coaches. Like, I would say he assists them. He just makes sure things happen. Philly's a town where, shit happens. And it's a small town despite it being a big city. So I think, when people have described like Ernie Adams with Belichick, they're like, yeah, I'm not really sure what he did, but I know what he did was important. Well, Bill kind of knew what he did, and Ernie kind of knew what he did, and it just worked. It's kind of dumb, except it's not like on the field scheme stuff, which Ernie kind of did. It's more like lifestyle stuff. So whether it's helping guys out, whether it's a situation, it's a lot of personal stuff. Just making things happen or go away. It's really hard to describe. I mean, I can't give you like I could give you a couple examples way back in the day. Uh, Probably statute of limitations. It wouldn't matter. It's not like I know like incidents that are going on right now, specific things, but I just know the general. It's why when people describe him, everyone talks about him kind of like a mythological figure because you can't exactly say what he's doing, even though half of it's not even bad. But every team's like that. I used to hear stories about Eddie DeBartolo when he owned the Niners in the 80s. Like, you think, I mean, same thing with like Al Davis in the 70s. Like, all these guys had dudes that just took care of stuff. I'd like to get your take on just how close teams with no realistic chance of winning a championship are to the cream of the crop in both the NFL and college. Here's the scenario: I'm a 36-year-old, 6 feet tall, 230 pounds, out of shape. Get to play as a 12th man on every snap of offense, defense, and special teams for the Jacksonville Jags or the West Virginia Mountaineers, my favorite team. Injury sliders are turned off for me, and opponents only get to play with 11. I recognize that my 40 time probably starts with a 6, and I can probably only bench 200 pounds. Nevertheless, I am able to body adult males that would need to at least be accounted for schematically, and I suspect my presence would immediately catapult the team to contender status. I would be a little utility in open space. I would be of little utility in open space, but sure, my use as an extra blocker or inside rusher for every snap would pose timing and assignment issues. Oh, you get to play as a 12th man. uh, it's a good question. I think you would probably impact more on defense. Like, for example, in the run game. If I just placed you between the slot and whoever my rusher is, and you just ran up field, you would be like a force defender to in the run game, anything outside would force the guy in. Or if the guy was busting a run, like, it was an inside run and he tried to break it out, you would be there. Even if you couldn't catch him and tackle him, which would be difficult in the Big 12 level, I mean, you would be the worst athlete on the field every game you played. The NFL, you'd have no shot. You'd have a better shot in college because the guys aren't as strong. In the NFL, you get hurt. That'd be another thing. You would get injured. Like you would get hurt, and you would get hurt fast. So as a 12th defender, even if you played for the Jags, like someone on the Titans would injure you. Who the Jags just played? The Jets. Like they would fuck you up. I mean, and honestly, it would happen in college too, depending on the team. I mean, you get hit hard in college. But there's a big difference getting hit by a guy at Alabama and getting hit by a guy at uh, Texas Tech. But in the NFL, you would not last a game. I think you would get injured quick. You would get tossed around like a rag doll. So if you weren't touched, I guess you could impact plays on defense. Offensively, I do not know what you would do because I would not put you at the line of scrimmage. You would get tossed. If I moved you as a slot or a wide receiver, a DB could break it off and come catch you. I think you would have little to no role as a bad athlete and out of shape. Listen to your answer about paying Brock. If we agree that Brock is easily a top 15 quarterback, most people have him in the top 10, and you're wanting to pay him $25 million dollars a year, do you think there could be a market reset for quarterback payouts? Because if the Jags are paying Trevor that much, he's garbage. Why wouldn't a team pay Brock twice as much as Trevor? Also, the rise of backup quarterbacks like Darnold and Sam, or Darnold and Gino, could mess with the market. Is he a top 10 quarterback? He was last year when everyone was healthy. Is he this year? Uh, we know he's not. You know, Mahomes can have the worst year of his career and he's infinitely better. Burrow obviously much better. Lamar obviously much better. Josh Allen obviously much better. Justin Herbert's a better player. Matt Stafford is a better player. Uh, I think then we start arguing about the group that he's in, like the Dak. Kirk Cousins isn't good anymore. Jared Goff is a better player this year. Now he's on a better team. Jalen Hurts is currently playing better or just more functional. Yeah, I think it just becomes complicated. Again, I understand that like he's not going to sign for $25 million a year. My point is like I just have a hard time giving him $200 million guaranteed. I can't do it, especially not with a year remaining on his contract. My guess is they give him like $150 million guaranteed. If they give him 200, like I just maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about. Or maybe the 49ers are just like the Jags and the Dolphins. Maybe they don't know quarterback that well, the quarterback market. And they traded everything for Trey Lance, and now they're giving him. We'll just have to see how it plays out. But can you explain more about how teams deal with injuries like we have? This is a Lions fan. As far as once a player goes on IR and we sign a new player or an entire defense like Detroit has to, is the player on IR counted against the cap? How do you balance the cap and money if you're having to sign so many additional players to fill in for these injuries? At a certain point, you hit the salary cap. How do you sign additional players? Well, when a guy goes on injured reserve, his cap money, like the money you're actually paying him, changes for a lot of these players. This is a good question for like or Jake Rosenberg, specifically on the cap. But basically, when I put a guy on IR, he no longer takes one of the 53-man roster spots. And then when I sign one of these guys, I'm obviously paying him the minimum salary. So if I'm up against the salary cap and I have an injury, how can I pay a guy when I'm up against the salary cap? I'll be honest, I don't exactly know how to explain that because I don't know the exact logistics of it. Clearly, it makes sense once it's explained by a cap guy. But I know that like when your roster opens up, a guy's salary, if he's playing, you're paid to play games. So Cousins is getting $60 million whether he plays, whether he doesn't, whether he goes into reserve. But a lot of guys' salaries, it it depends whether are you active on game day? Or are you dressed on game day? Are you on injury reserve? A lot of these salaries get cut in half. Like we're not just paying you to be on, even though it's not your fault you got injured, but you get paid less. Like ultimately, you're compensated to play these games. Now, Ray Lewis once famously said, "You pay me Monday through Saturday, Sundays are for free." But that's a better question for a cap guy. I don't know the exact answer to that one, or like how to describe it properly. I've been a Titans fan my entire life. I feel like we are such a weird spot. With quarterback being the main question mark, it had me thinking, what can we realistically do? I don't think we get ahead of the Raiders or the Giants for Sanders or Ward. I also don't think Darnold would be playing at the same level he would be in Tennessee without Kevin O'Connell. I also don't see a Rand Carthon could risk his job with another year of Levis. If you were the GM of the Titans, what would you do? I do think you'd have to entertain Sam Darnold. I do think Sam Darnold in your division, you would have to think long and hard about. Will Levis is never going to be your quarterback again after this year. Like, I don't even think he's on the team. I think he'd probably get cut. Like the Will Levis experiment ends right now. Or yeah, I don't. We'll see it. How many games does he play? Is he benched? What his situation is these last 3 games. But there will never be Will Levis anymore in a Titans uniform. So you go, the draft is after free agency. So in free agency, if Sam Darnold is available, like, would you be willing to give him a Baker Mayfield contract? We saw Callahan, with Joe Burrow. We know how he wants to play on offense. Um, your options are kind of limited. Like, this is not going to be some loaded situation. The draft is terrible. We'll see. Quinn Ewers might not come out. He's not even a good player. Carson Beck, who knows? Is Cam Ward a top 10 draft pick? That seems kind of bold. Dion, not Dion, Shador. I mean, all signs point to him being the number one pick. Um, would Dion even allow Shador to go to you? I don't know. I don't know, man. I mean, I'm not saying you're screwed, but I think you're in a little trouble. Do you think Kyle Shanahan is unfairly escaping criticism this season? He has been brilliant for years, but much like Belichick, he is very slow to adapt or adjust. A lot of the struggles this year are on injuries, plain and simple. But Kyle had a funky year where he refused to adjust even though he had gotten predictable. Teams know exactly what he's going to run. Every time Debo was in the backfield, they kept force feeding players like CMC and Debo even when it was clear it wasn't effective. He has never been good halftime adjuster. His teams just tend to have the lead, so it doesn't matter. I wonder if his commitment to the game plan is hampering his quarterback's development and ability to make decisions. For example, calling audibles or even using his legs. I don't think he scrambled at all that Rams game. You would think he would dial up a play using Brock's legs. I have always thought uh, I always thought the might of the 49ers weapons were a bit overstated. Outside of McCaffrey, who's a monster, they are average at receiver and have a very good tight end. You could probably name 8, 9 teams with a better overall core of weapons. I think the receivers, Ayuk's hurt, but when Ayuk's there, Juwan Jennings, Kittle, I mean, ultimately, if your tight end's a good pass catcher, he's a receiving option. That's pretty good. I wonder if this is being slowed by the lack of weapons or it's the play caller. He needs that physicality and ability to separate for his schemes to run the way he wants them. They went from the best Yak team to one of the worst. Is this true? How do they fix? I think he's very, very reluctant. And this is the way he builds his team. Like, he doesn't want to play like, old school Andy Reid. I don't want to throw the ball 40 times a game. I want to play where the running game dictates the passing game. It's a very old school way of thinking. Even if the running back is coming back, that's just because our run game is effective. A lot of teams like, oh, run game's working today. We will keep running the ball. Kyle is dead set on making sure the run game works. And a lot of his pass plays are dependent on those run plays working. And if those pass plays are not going to get used if the run game gets stuffed. And then a lot of his passing game is tied to like the boots and the waggles off the running game. Well, it feels like a lot of times this year, when you're playing Brock Purdy, you know that, like, hey, do not bite on play action fakes because he's going to roll right to you. And how many times they have tried to run like an outside zone that's a fake run, the play action play, with Brock then turning around and running the other way, and the defender's right in his face. It's like, Kyle, you've been running this play. And again, I'm not saying scrap the play, but it is not as effective after 4 fucking years of using the play. And I just think that a lot of times, like, they can't just drop back and throw. So I don't have a great answer. Obviously, Kyle knows what he's doing and knows his offense really well. He's clearly just been out of sync this year. And I think losing McCaffrey early on in the season really threw him off. And I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you. I do think it gets back to, though, personnel. And their offensive line sucks. So beside Trent Williams, just to be like, we're going to drop back 40 times a game, Kyle would be like, our guy's going to get killed. And I'd be like, well, start drafting some more offensive linemen. You draft Ricky Pearsall in the first round, and you find Ricky Pearsall in the fourth. So my bigger issue is, not investing in offensive line. In fairness to Kyle, you watch some of these teams play, right? They drop back and their guy just gets killed. And it's like they just call pass play after pass play. That's probably what would happen if they just called pass play after pass play with his offensive line. So some of these, like some of his minions, like Bobby Slowick, is like, bro, you keep calling pass plays with your offensive line, you're gonna get fucking CJ. They're gonna bury him in the ground. Look at Gino. I mean, Gino's clearly running around for his life. My question is kind of twofold. As a Seattle fan, we used to be one of the best home field advantages in the league. Now we can't win at home to save our life. So, one, what do you think is to blame for Seattle's home struggles this year? Also, I don't see Gino or Sam Howell being the quarterback long term. Well, I think we agree with Sam Howell. I think there's a chance Gino's your quarterback for a couple more years. I think sometimes we take for granted of like your team was elite. So for like 4 or 5 years, you had Russell Wilson and this unreal defense. You were winning most of your games, home or away. But at home, like your fans viewed you as the best team in the league. So it was a massive deal when that team played, right? It's still a big deal when you play a home game, but most of the people walking into that building don't go, this is the best team we've ever seen. So I think sometimes we overthink, like, you had the best team in the history of your franchise for like legitimately a 3 or 4 year run. And this isn't the same. And part of dominate, like, your defense was elite. So when your defense is elite, people aren't going to score on you and it's super loud. A good home field, I'm not going to be able to hear anything. So it's kind of a double whammy. Well, your defense hasn't been as good the last 4 or 5 years. So the home field advantage is neutralized a little bit. Uh, I think it's really just that simple, right? I mean, your team was a lot better. Team's not bad now. I think you've won 9 games. If you win 9 games this year, that's like 3 years in a row. But there was a stretch there when, and this was pre 17 game season. So basically, when you really started kicking everyone's ass was 2012, 11 and 5, 12 and 3, 12 and 4. So you had a 3 year run of just domination. 2015, you're pretty good too. You went 10 and 6. Then you went 10 and 5 and 1. Then you kind of had the down year as you started pivoting off some of the players, 9 and 7. And then you're really good at the end of the decade, 10 and 6, 11 and 5, 12 and 4. Now you were losing earlier in the playoffs than the previous years, but still, like, you were really good. And now these last couple of years of Pete and now Mike, 7 and 10, 9 and 8, 9 and 8, and now you're probably at 9 and 18. So I mean, there's a big difference between the teams we've seen these last 3 years that are 9 and 8 and the LOB Marshawn Lynch teams. Like those, I think we all agree that if I take the 2013 Seattle Seahawks and they play the Mike McDonald, Geno Smith Seattle Seahawks, if we're putting a line on DraftKings on that game, like I like the LOB Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, Marshawn Lynch Seattle Seahawks by a touchdown, if not more. And if I told every fan what team, they're one's wearing green and the other is wearing white, you can wear one of the two jerseys and that shows what team you're rooting for. What team do you think they'd be rooting for? We're all human beings. Like, we know what we're rooting for. It's like, why aren't the Chiefs losing? Because their fucking fans never think they're going to lose when they enter the stadium. And in fairness to them, they never do. For the money bag, what's your gym and diet routine, if you follow any? I go to the gym. I try to go 7 days a week. I'd say weights, 3 days, cardio the other four. And sometimes with the weights, we get cardio as well. With the wedding not too far away, I've kind of upped the intensity of the Stairmaster. Usually do the Stairmaster on cardio days for 60 minutes. Weights, kind of lighter, higher rep, just try to tighten up the bod. Diet is just very hit or miss. I have a sweet tooth. It's probably my downfall. Not a huge drinker. I would say I can go on stretches where I'm pretty good at like fasting. Not eating breakfast is pretty easy for me. When I'm light and losing weight, I mean I was skinny a couple years ago. I would supplement lunch with like chocolate milk to get some protein and whatever she makes for dinner. We get HelloFresh, so we eat HelloFresh a couple times a week. Go to the store, make some food, eat out maybe once or twice a week. I mean, pretty normal diet. I would say carbs and sugars are things that when I get bigger, I eat too much of, and when I slim down, I avoid. Sugar's a key thing for me. If I can avoid sugars, I can drop like 10 pounds quick. When I'm eating, holidays, obviously, you just eat cakes and pies and fucking candy around. So diet is something that is just I could be a lot better at. I have incredible discipline getting to the gym on a daily basis. Even if at the gym I'm not claiming to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I can get there and work out no problem because I have to do it for my mentals. I'll lose my mind. I don't like the way I feel if I don't get a sweat every day in some form or fashion. Even if it's just sometimes I'll just go on like an hour walk around like where I live. But I gotta move or my mind doesn't work. But as you get older, you realize you can't outrun a bad diet. And to me, I even feel it from like 36 to 40 years old. It's dramatic. And there was a big switch for those listening in their 20s. Like it starts hitting your late 20s to your early 30s is a dramatic change. I remember being in the NFL, seeing like older guys be very good about their diet and realizing that they knew that you got to be like you could. I remember Deshaun Jackson could eat fucking French fries, 3 meals a day. That'd be his only meal, like French fry. It wouldn't even matter, right? But some guys you got to be careful, and I definitely don't have the genetics where I can't just eat like shit. And at my core, I kind of like. I don't really like eating like shit as you get older because I don't feel great, but I have no problem taking in the food. And then after you're like, I kind of regret that. I'm loving Bo Nix and Sean Payton combination. Do you think his ceiling is higher than the draft analysts thought? I would say I think Bo Nix is a good example. And this is like a lot of players. Some guys can transcend, like Lamar Jackson was going to be a really talented, explosive NFL player, whether he played for the Ravens or whether he played for the Jags. But do you know what turns out about Trevor Lawrence? Like, he might have really needed to go to a stable organization. And I think Purdy, who we talk a lot about here, Bo Nix, some guys are desperate if they're going to succeed to go to a good coach and go to someone that knows what they're doing. Like if you put Bo Nix on Jacksonville or you put Bo Nix on like just put him on the Giants, it would look awful. It would not look good, right? Just like if you gave Bo Nix to Andy Reid, he'd be a good player. If you give Bo Nix to Sean Payton, he'd be a good player. If you gave Bo Nix to Kyle Shanahan, he'd be a good player. If you give Brock Purdy to Andy Reid, he'd be a good player. So I think most guys that aren't like Kyler Murray, who's up and down player, like on any given play, he can look like the best player in the league. Most guys don't have that capability. So most guys are very, very dependent on who's calling the plays and who's coaching them up. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.